Good evening and Hanukkah Sameach, everybody. We are so delighted that you could spend this holiday with us, and we are pleased to introduce you to Professor Edwin Seroussi, who I'm sure all of you know. He is a professor of musicology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the director of the Jewish Music Research Center, and Israel Prize winner in music. And Edwin, I will hand the floor over to you because I know that we have a wonderful, wonderful program.
Thank you very much, Francine. Okay, thank you. And happy Hanukkah to everybody from Jerusalem, to all the friends of Hebrew University in America, in Europe, and in all other continents that are joining us this evening. I am glad to be with you this evening to share an hour of song and music on this holiday of lights, hoping that this virtual talk will bring some comfort for the dreadful health crisis that all humanity is going now through. And I promise you that this presentation is going to be mostly about music, so we will start with music. I won't tell you right now what is this recording from and when it was done. That will come a little bit later in the evening or in the morning for you. All what I want to tell you is that our subject is a song, Maoz Tzur, the song that most Jewish families sing in Hanukkah. If you want to know something about Maoz Tzur, what do? You go like everybody today, you go to Wikipedia, where you find a very nice article on the subject. So the question is, what can a Hebrew University professor add to Wikipedia? I'm bringing you this picture not only because of my colleague, the professor that keeps walking in our campus for more than 100 years now, but from the building that is behind him, which is the building of the National Library at the Safra campus of the Hebrew University, where our Jewish Music Research Center is located, and from where most of the materials that you're going to listen to and see this on this occasion are located. I want to talk about 1 minute about the power of music and how to think about music outside of the box. My main claim is that music is not only an art, it is a medicine, and it is spiritual food that sustains our body and soul. This is why studying music and researching music is so crucial and so central at the Hebrew University. And also, I want to remind you that music is a tool that generates and maintains individual and collective memory. And memory is going to be a very important issue in the following words that I'm going to tell you. We are what we remember. When we cannot remember, our existence ceases to be meaningful. memory counts. So a few basic concepts for the discussion of Maoz Tzur, and I promise you this is the only slide that is academic, a little bit theoretical, but I want you to share with you how we think about music beyond Wikipedia. Our first concern is about issues of conception and inception, how a song is made, how it comes to this world, what are the processes of creativity that are involved in the invention and sustenance of a song. And also, I want you to remind that creativity is never 100%. It always draws from previous experiences. It borrows. So borrowing and creating goes hand by hand. We are also going to speak about how a song, in this case, is transmitted and diffused. What are the mechanisms of oral, written, printed, and digital media that allows for the distribution of a song, or perhaps for the forgetting of a song? We also want to talk about the reception of a song, how a song is received over the generations, how it is accepted, how it becomes part of certain canons, of certain very accepted ways of performing culture. But also, songs can be eventually rejected, forgetting, or they can be, as we will see, edited, cut, pasted, translated. All that can happen to the song. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about modernization, how traditional Jewish culture that usually was orally transmitted becomes secularized, becomes part of a modern national enterprise, and how the mass media allows for the circulation of different versions of the song. All this for theory. We now go into the song. I am sure that most of the public listening to me knows the song very well, sings the song. What people usually don't know is that the original song has 6 stanzas, 6 verses if you want, and what we sing today is only the first verse. The song is not an easy song to take if you are talking about politically correctness of our times. It's a song of rebuke. It's quite a violent song, I would say, against the non-Jews, or at least against those who put a bond on the people of Israel, like the Assyrians and the Persians, and of course, in the 5th stanza, the Greeks. So the 5th stanza of Maoz Tzur is actually the one that links the song directly to Hanukkah. Greeks gathered against me, then in Hasmonean days, they breached the walls of my towers and they defiled all the oils. And from the one remnant of the flasks, a miracle was brought to the roses, men of insight, 8 days established for song and jubilation. And song and jubilation is the staple of Hanukkah, as we all know. The very end of the poem says, repel the red one. Who is the red one? Admon in Hebrew, that's the Christian. And this rebuke against Christianity led to the fact that, as we will see, this last stanza was erased from many prayer books. When was Maoz Tzur composed and where? Where, according to the most recent research, it probably was conceived in the banks of the river Rhine in Germany in the late 12th century. And the poem, interestingly enough, shows the incipient influence on Ashkenaz. And Ashkenaz, remember, at that time is German Jewry. There is still no Jewry in Eastern Europe. And this German Jewry starts to be poetically influenced by the very strong Sephardic school that emerged in medieval Spain. From our earliest sources, the song Maoz Tzur is called a zemer. That is to say, it is a song to be performed with a melody in the context of home and family. A little bit, just one word about how a Hebrew song is made. Most piyutim, most of these religious Hebrew songs are made of biblical language in the Sephardic tradition, and so is Maoz Tzur. So I will only tell you about the three first words of the poem, Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. This string of three words appears for the first time in a poem by the great Sephardic poet and philosopher Solomon Ibn Gvirol. But Ibn Gvirol took all these expressions and put them together in a string of three words from two different Psalms. Psalms 31 or 89. 31 says, "You are my rock and my fortress." And Psalm 89, it says, "You are the rock of my salvation." And this is how we end up with fortress, rock of my salvation. So if you know Bible, if you know the Psalms, when you sing Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, you know that you are also saying verses from the Psalms. Maoz Tzur became extremely widespread, as we will see in various documents. We can attest for its constant practice. It was printed already in 1560, very early in the history of the printing press, in the Mahzor Mikol HaShana, in the Mahzor, in the order of prayers for the whole year, according to the Ashkenazi Minhag, published in 1560. Very early on, Maoz Tzur starts to appear more often in Seder Birkat Hamazon. The one pictured here is bencher. I learned this word in America, a sort of Yiddish word that became Americanized. This bencher from 1739. You have here Maoz Tzur, and already here you have the song cut. The last stanza disappeared. We are living in Christian countries, and you don't want to upset the rulers of the country. So Maoz Tzur, it's censored or changed. That is to say, parts of the song are deleted, or there are alterations. Some of these alterations in the wording are imposed by church censorship. However, many are self-imposed restraint by the Jews themselves, particularly after the 18th century, when Jews start to be accepted in European society. You don't want to sing a song that is so violent towards the non-Jewish others. Also, another strategy is to translate Maoz Tzur into other languages. Of course, the first language in which it is translated is German, and you see here already some musical arrangement of this German translation. The German translation is very ecumenical, speaks about being against oppression, oppression as is, not specifically the oppression of the non-Jews against Jews, but any type of oppression, and also stressing the unity of humankind under God. And now, after this literary and theoretical introduction, let's move into our first musical example. So this is the tune that most Jewish families sing today all around the world. Regretfully, I cannot play you this entire piece by the great cantor Moshe Oisher. Many of you know this name or perhaps even heard him in the past. The composition in this long play called Hanukkah Party covers all the stanzas of the song. It goes into cantorial recitatives, the continuation, so I cannot play it. Just to tell you about the presence of the song as in the mainstream of American Jewish culture in the 1950s. So research, what we do in the Jewish Music Research Center, for the origins of this traditional melody. We want to know the history of our memory, how the song became what it is today. And we start with one of my heroes, cantor and composer Edward Birnbaum, who lived most of his life in northern Prussia, in the city of Königsberg. And I consider him as the father of our profession, the father of Jewish music. This is one of the representatives of what is called the school, the German school of the science of Judaism. If you are from Ohio, Cincinnati, the great collection of Cantor Birnbaum is located today at the Hebrew Union College. How it got there is a topic for another lecture. In 1899, Birnbaum publishes a piece for pianoforte, that is to say for piano. This is our Maoz Tzur, exactly as we sing it today, arranged for piano performance. But Cantor Birnbaum was a great scholar, so he introduced his piano piece with this small article, which contains a tremendous amount of information related to the origins or the possible origins of the traditional melody of Maoz Tzur. One of the most interesting pieces of information that he brings is that we can find a German folk song already published in the early or in the mid 16th century that contains at least the first 4 bars of Maoz Tzur. La li ra ri ra ri ra ra. That's what's written in this very old musical notation. So note by note, all the beginning of Maoz Tzur is part of the German general folk music atmosphere in which the Jews live. Another very interesting piece of information that Birnbaum brings is that, to his knowledge, the first version of the entire melody of Maoz Tzur appears in this very interesting publication, The Hebrew Melodies, Ancient and Modern, by Lord Byron, the great British poet. Lord Byron wrote poems called Hebrew Melodies, and the Jewish composer Isaac Nathan, composed music, and he used traditional Ashkenazi British melodies to compose Lord Byron's music, songs. And here you have the song is called On Jordan's Banks. The melody of Maoz Tzur in its entirety appears as I would say, a lead or an aria for voice with piano accompaniment. Another piece of information that Birnbaum brings that it's important for my argument is that already in 1450, we are still at the very end of the Middle Ages, Reb Baruch ben Samson Arweiler writes a poem for Hanukkah, and he says, Benigun Maoz Tzur Yeshuati Zot Yasadeti. That is to say, I based my poem on the melody of Maoz Tzur. That is to say that in 1450, there was already a recognizable melody that this poet could say to the singer, hey, you sing my song to the melody of Maoz Tzur, and the singer will know to what melody to sing. Regretfully, I cannot tell you that the melody we sing today is the melody of 1450, but I suspect that there is something in it that remains already established by the 15th century. Not only that, but the same folk German song that we saw is the basis of Maoz Tzur is adapted by another, so to speak, new religion, the Christian Reformation by Martin Luther. Luther was a genius in social networking, if I may say. He needed a new church established from one day to another. How do you establish a new communities and you change the language of the liturgy from Latin to German? So he just used the best known and most famous German folk songs and put new words. And that became the basis for the Reformed Christian worship. Let's listen to Luther's arrangement of this same German folk song that is the basis for Maoz Tzur. So we have a methodological problem. The beginning is identical to Maoz Tzur, but the continuation is not. More about that in a minute. All the information that Cantor Birnbaum published appears after very few years in the Jewish Encyclopedia, the most important modern Jewish encyclopedic undertaking of the beginning of the 20th century. This article on Maoz Tzur. Interesting, there is an entire article about one song in the Jewish Encyclopedia, and that song is Maoz Tzur, written by the Reverend Francis Leonel Cohen from Great Britain. And he, of course, quotes everything from Birnbaum, but he adds a little piece of information. It says that the song was modified by the English Jews. Who modified the song? This man, Julius Mombach, the great cantor of the great synagogue of London, Duke's Place. Once again, I bring you a picture for you to see this magnificent 19th century cathedral synagogues of Europe. Most of them were destroyed in the war. And Mombach came from Germany, and he, like many other German Jews, relocated in England, and they brought their traditions, including Maoz Tzur. This is Mombach's version of Maoz Tzur as it appears in the Jewish Encyclopedia. Look at the words under the text and you will see that it's not the first stanza, but the fifth stanza, the stanza that speaks about the Greeks. And what we have here different is that the repetition of the first part of the song doesn't end as we know it. So I will sing it for you. I don't have a recording, and I hope that you're not terrified by my singing. I am not a great singer, but I can do something for you. La ra ri ra 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 ri la ra ra ri ra ra ri la ra ri ra ri ra ra la ra ri ra 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 ra. So you see it goes in a different direction. And then it goes back, la, ra, ri, ra, 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 etc. So when you hear a person singing Maoz Tzur with that little melodic change, you know that most probably that's a British Jew or a Jew from the British Empire. This is what I mean with the issues of memory and identity, how a certain way of doing a melody can reveal the identity, where you come from. We are all Jews and we all sing Maoz Tzur, but if you sing this version, you come from a very specific place. Another important piece of information that Cantor Birnbaum didn't know is brought up from this another scholar and musician from Germany, Arno Nadel, a very important figure in Jewish music. And in around the time of World War I, Nadel purchases a manuscript by a certain cantor called Judah Elias of Hanover. The manuscript is dated in 1744. Therefore, this is one of the oldest, if not the oldest known manuscript written in music notation by a Jew. And the manuscript includes two pieces with the melody of Maoz Tzur. So we know that the melody already existed as we know it in 1744. However, the melody is not with the words of Maoz Tzur, but with the words of the Psalms, Odu Ladonai Kitov Kile Olam Chasdo. So it was a custom to sing these verses from the Psalms in the synagogue, not at the home, with the melody of Maoz Tzur. The melody that Nadel published from the manuscript, by the way, the original manuscript was lost in the Holocaust. We don't have it. All what we have is a selection of melodies that Nadel, thank God, at least he published few of them in mostly in journals of Berlin. And the melody was republished by my dear Professor Israel Adler, the founder of the Jewish Music Research Center at the Hebrew University, and in his book, Hebrew Notated Manuscript Sources. And here you see the melody without text, and you can see that the melody starts exactly as Maoz Tzur, but then it continues like a piece in the Baroque style, in the style of the period when Cantor Judah of Hanover lived. La ra ri ra ri ra la ra ri ra 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 la ra ri ra 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 ri la la ra 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 la la ra 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 ra. It goes into a totally different story. It becomes like a little Baroque concerto if you want, but still is an evidence that the melody that we know today, at least in 1744, was very well known and adapted for the synagogue. Another important researcher, Abraham Tzvi Edelson, many consider him as the father of Jewish music research. In 1933, publishes an article on German elements in the old synagogue singing of Germany. And he brings, for example, new evidence. Look at this. This is a responsa, a rabbinical set of answers that a rabbi gives to the congregation. And the man who wrote this, compilation included songs by his grandpa, Abraham Samuel Bachrach of Worms, who wrote also a hymn for Hanukkah that used to be sung Benigun Maoz Tzur, to the melody of Maoz Tzur. And this is another piece of evidence that there was a very well-known melody for Maoz Tzur that the poet could say, please sing my song to the melody of Maoz Tzur. So now we are joining the date 1744. We already know that our melody is more or less in place as we know it. 1606, he says, please sing my song to the Nigun of Maoz Tzur. That gives us a good chance that what we sing today is rooted on a very ancient German Jewish tradition. And Edelson, what he tried to do is to find other German sources for the second and third musical phrases of Maoz Tzur, for which the one that Luther used doesn't have the evidence. So here you see all the sources. I won't go into that. We don't have the time now. But the question is, how come that the melody is based on 3 or 4 different songs? Cannot we think about Jewish creativity that uses quotations, but in a way creates a totally new unit. And here we have another of my dear professors of blessed memory, Hanocha Benari. He publishes in 1967, an article bringing other evidence, not so much from the heartland of Germany, but now from Bohemia, from what is today the Czech Republic. And he finds in the hymnals of the Hussite movement, the Hussites are one of the movements that rebel against the authority of the church in Rome, has once again a Christian anthem that is very similar to Maoz Tzur. And this one is similar not only in the beginning, but also in the middle. And it's very interesting that Professor Avenari found another manuscript, probably written in Prague in 1820, although we don't have the original, we have a copy in the National Library of Israel, in which you have the melody of Maoz Tzur, the German one, but a little bit transformed and different, that makes it a little bit alike with the other Bohemian sources. So now we have tension between the German hardcore melody and traditions from the area of Bohemia. Which one preceded one, I cannot tell at this moment. Finally, all this information appears in the Great Encyclopedia Judaica of 1972, and this is the main source from where Professor Wikipedia takes all its information. So what I wanted to show you here is that there is a pedigree, there is a story of information that goes from one researcher to the other, from one collector to the other, and I wanted to give the credit to the people who create this chain of Jewish musical memory. Let's now go into arrangements and offshoots of the traditional tune. We are now going to hear mostly music. One of the interesting examples I want to bring you is a composition by Samuel David, who was the very important figure in Jewish music in France in the late 19th century. And he composed the Hanukkah blessings to the tune of Maoz Tzur. Let's listen to this recording that were done by cantorial students from the Jewish Theological Seminary when they were studying here in Jerusalem, and the project was conducted by Hazan Marlena Fersman. Another version of Maoz Tzur, which is interesting and unique, is the one recorded by Leo Levi. Leo Levi, another important figure in Jewish music, and giving today credit to many of those who really made this field what it is. And he was an Italian Jew from the city of Gorizia, and he recorded himself the tradition of his own family. Gorizia is very close to the German-speaking towns, and look at the or listen to the very special rendition from Gorizia, Italy, how it differs and how it creates a local identity within the framework of the German melody.
Maoz Tzur yeshungati lechana leshabeach tikon vetefilati veshatona leshabeach lenet tachemat veach mitzaram nabeach azehmar b'shir mizmor Hanukkah tamizbeach.
Let's go now a little bit into the American story of the traditional German tune of Maoz Tzur. The tune and the piyut, the song, the Zemer Maoz Tzur, was obviously brought to America by German Jews. And already in the 19th century, Marcus Jastrow and Gustav Gottheil translate Maoz Tzur and in a way create a new paraphrase of Maoz Tzur, Rock of Ages. And many American Jews, this is the version that they know of Maoz Tzur. The song with the music appears in the Union Hymnal of the Reform Movement, a very important document from 1897, arranged, of course, for choral, for 4 voices. The song reappears also in Israel Goldfarb's Song of Praise for Sabbath Eve. Here we have, as you can see, 2 stanzas. That becomes the standard in American songsters, where you have the first stanza and the 5th stanza of the original poem. And another interesting issue here, and I'm sorry I'm going now into little details of musicology, but what is the American version that in a way continues the German one is the one that in the very last phrase, what you have is la ra ri la ra ra ra. I will show you why this is so important and how Americans and Israelis differ in the version that they sing of Maoz Tzur. Maoz Tzur appears again. This is for our friends of the Hebrew University in Chicago. Appears in a very important publication, very influential, by Harry Coopersmith, Song of My People, published by the Anshe Emes congregation in Chicago. And here again, you have only the 1st and 5th stanza, and you have Rock of Ages on the side. And this songster had a very wide distribution in American Jewish schools. So many music teachers in American schools in the 30s and 40s and 50s used Songs of My People. So here you see again, la ra ri ra ri ra ra, la ri ra ri ra ri ra ra. Another very important songster published in America is published about the same time like Coopersmith by Moshe Nathanson. And Nathanson is not an American Jew. He is a Jew from Eretz Israel, born, raised, and educated in Jerusalem under Abraham Tzvi Evilson that I mentioned before. He comes to America in the early 1920s and becomes the cantor in New York City of the new Reconstructionist movement. He was the cantor of Mordechai Kaplan. And here we have something very interesting. First of all, we have this repetition of the last phrase, which was already customary in America and is very characteristic of the Israeli version. And here you have the way the song obviously was sung in Palestine at the time. By the way, most Hebrew songs coming from Eretz Israel at the time were known in America as Palestinian songs, which is interesting to think about that in our days. So what do you have? La ra ra la ri ra ra, not la ra ri ra 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 ra, but you go up instead of going down. And this is one of the characteristics of the Israeli version. So you see, you can identify yourself just by the way you sing Maoz Tzur. Let's hear a few bars of Rock of Ages in an American folk style performed by Mark Combs to give honor to the American tradition of Maoz Tzur.
Just let our song praise your saving power. Thou amidst the raging foes, you were our sheltering tower, our sheltering tower. Just let our song praise thy saving power. Thou amidst the raging force, you were our sheltering tower, our sheltering tower.
I'm sorry I have to cut all these beautiful performances for the sake of time. Let's go for 1 minute into Maoz Tzur in non-Ashkenazi communities. So Maoz Tzur is a quintessential Ashkenazi piyut or zemer. It spread throughout the Jewish world only in the 20th century. And most of the non-Ashkenazi Jews learned the song in Israel. And it transmitted the song to the non-Ashkenazi Jewish communities in the diaspora. My first example, a very short one, is by Chazan Gabriel Shrem of the Syrian Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. And you will hear his version. By the way, you can see the song printed in the Songster of the Syrian community. It's included under the Arabic scale, Makam Hajam, which is the Makam of that corresponds to the major scale of Western music. Here, the heavy Arabic accent that Mr. Shrem has in his performance of Maoz Tzur.
The next Pizmon is Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, page 166. Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, Lechana Elisabeyah, Ikun betetefilati, Reshem todan Elisabeyah, E'et tachin matbeyah, B'sar hanabeyah, Ad Elmor B'shir Mizmor Hanukkah, Mizbeah, Ad Elmor B'shir Mizmor Hanukkah, Mizbeah.
Another version, this is in honor of my friends in Canada, my Canadian friends of the Hebrew University. This is the performance now in an Andalusian style, we will say almost in a flamenco style, by Rabbi David Kadosh of Toronto Sabir Yaakov congregation. Rabbi Kadosh is an amazing performer of Moroccan Algerian style, even though he is a quintessential Canadian. He's an amazing figure in terms of maintaining a memory that he just learned from his elders.
Maoz Tzur Yeshuati V'chanae Leshabeach Tikon Bet Tefilati V'sham Toda Nezabeach.
Amazingly beautiful, isn't it? How creativity can totally change and the 16th song and turn that into something new. There are other melodies for Maoz Tzur in the Ashkenazi tradition too. Not everything is the German melody. Let's listen to a Hungarian melody performed by Mr. Abraham Ehrenfeld from our National Sound Archives in Jerusalem. Pay attention to the heavy Hungarian Ashkenazi accent that this singer has. A melody that is traditional in Budapest, and what you see is the picture of the great synagogue of Budapest, one of the few that survived the Holocaust.
Maoz Tzur Seroussi Lecho Noel Shabeach Tikkoin Bes Tefilosi Beshum Taidon Zabeach Leistochin Matbeach Mitzor Hamnabeach Ozeg Moir Beshir Mizmoir Chanikas Hamizbeach.
A second version from the city of Frankfurt. This is a melody associated only with the tradition of Frankfurt. So even though we are in Germany, this is a different melody. And here you have the Bernplatz Synagogue, one of the great synagogues of Frankfurt that was, as you can see the picture, one of the rare pictures we have of the burning of the synagogue in Kristallnacht.
Maoz Tzur Yeshuati Lechanae Leshabeach Tikon Bet Tefilati V'sham Toda Nezabeach Le'et Tachin Matbeach Mitzam Nabeach Azeg Mo B'shir Mizmor Chanukat HaMizbeach.
Something about Maoz Tzur in Hasidic courts. The Hasidim prioritize the fifth stanza. They never go for the first stanza, only the fifth stanza. And of course, they avoid systematically the traditional German tune that smacks of assimilation. Let me play one of the most beautiful performances of this fifth stanza. This is recorded live in a Tish, a reunion of all the Hasidim with the Rebbe in Jerusalem in 1987. This is live, included in the CD of the Jewish Music Research Center of the Hebrew University, the Hasidic Nigun as sung by the Hasidim. The man on your right is Cantor Phineas Spector, the great cantor of the Boyan court, and this is the dynasty from which we are listening to this performance.
I'm
and on in a circular performance. Every repetition of the melody goes stronger in terms of the dynamics. It's louder and louder, and it gets faster and faster. So it really creates an ecstasy around the table of Hanukkah. There are other less known nigunim, like this one that was published by another important collector of Hasidic nigunim, Meir Geshuri, in his book on the Hasidic and nigun and dance. We don't have a recording of this version that is attributed to Reb Mordechai, the cantor of Zaslav, who was the private cantor of Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the foundational figure of Hasidim. I will just hum for you this nigun, just a little bit of the beginning. Lai ra rai, lai lai rai ra rai, rai ra rai, lai lai rai la lai, lai lai rai la ra ra rai rai ra rai, lai ra rai la ra ra ri rai ra rai. Rai 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 lai 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 rai 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 rai, etc. Very beautiful nigun, not so much known. We have another amazing document from probably Hasidic traditions, even though it's written in this transcription by the same Italian musicologist Leo Levi, Oriental melody Lachan Mizrahi. He heard this melody from Mr. Nathan Hofshi from Moshav Nahalal in northern Israel. And this man was an amazing individual. He was one of the real first pacifists among the Zionist movement, very much close to Martin Buber. He was also one of the first vegetarians in the land of Israel, and he transmitted this nigun. Again, we don't have any recording. I will hum for you this Hasidic nigun, which is attributed to the Gur dynasty in Poland, to which the ancestors of Mr. Hofshi belonged to. Maoz Tzur Yeshuati lecha na veleshabeach tikon dei tefilati vesham toda nezabeach lehet hakin madbeach metzara menabeach azekmor beshir mizmor beautiful nigun, totally unknown. And the final example for this Hasidic chapter, before we reach the end of this presentation, is a nigun from Chabad. Chabad today probably one of the largest Hasidic movements, and here you can see and hear an instrumental version of the nigun, which is called Yevanim, after the 5th stanza of Maoz Tzur, performed by Hilik Frank, one of the most prominent today klezmorim of the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel, performed in Yeshivat Otniel. This is a yeshiva in which the students learn Judaism and music. It's a very interesting place. The last example of this presentation before we reach the end takes us back to the Venetian ghetto in Italy, the original ghetto, the first ghetto. And there's something marvelous happened. Around the beginning of the 18th century, a Christian composer, very famous in Venice, Benedetto Marcello, decides to compose 50 psalms for the church. However, he chooses as the inspiration for 11 out of the 50 psalms, Jewish melodies, thinking that the Jews keep the secret to the old Christian music. This is a very interesting episode. And he publishes the transcriptions of the song as he heard, in this case, from the German Ashkenazi Jews called Tedesco in Italian in Venice in 1724. He publishes the song. Look at how the transcription looks. He wrote the music from right to left to fit the direction of the Hebrew language. So in order to make this product possible, what we have here is really a collaboration between Christians and Jews in the making of music. This is a very interesting episode. I will play for you just a short version of Marcello's arrangement of the Ashkenazi melody for Maoz Tzur as he heard that in Venice, but set to words in Italian, Christian words. So who you think published this melody for the first time or brought to the public attention? Of course, Edward Birnbaum, whom I mentioned before in 1878, arranged in this case for voice and keyboard. Interesting enough, I won't play this out of the time considerations, but the Marcello melody remained in oral tradition in Italy until this very day. And finally, the Israeli Maoz Tzur, which has a very interesting story. On the one hand, we have the German version, but this Marcello tune, this Italian-German or Italian-Ashkenazi tune, was preferred by Zionist educators as being an alternative to the very un-Jewish tune of German origins. And here you can see the choral arrangement by the composer Yitzhak Edel. This arrangement was used in many Israeli schools in the 40s and 50s. And you can see here that melody, that same melody recorded by a Christian Jew, now attributed to him as the composer of the melody and appearing in the catalog of the Meir No Archive of Hebrew, that is to say of modern Hebrew songs. That's the way Maoz Tzur is cataloged in the National Library. Just a few bars of how this Marcello version of, or Italian version of Maoz Tzur was heard in Israel, performed by popular Israeli performers Sila Dagan and Oded Zamir.
Maoz Tzur Yeshuati Lechanael Leshabeach Tikon Beit Tefilati
finally, we can put the final nail on the Israeli version of Maoz Tzur. What changed? Not only the last part is repeated, but it got another melodic twist. La ra ri ra ri ra ri, la ra 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 ra, la ra 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 ra, la ra 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 ri ra ra. That's the Israeli version that we heard already from the non-Ashkenazi Jews in the United States being performed as the normative version today. That's the Israeli version, and the Israeli educators couldn't decide which one is the best one. So in this very important songster used in Israeli schools since the 1990s, you have both melodies, the German one and the Venetian Italian one, side by side for the teachers to decide which one they would like. Let me, towards the end, play you one of the recordings from Radio Israel. This is a very famous arrangement that was heard in the Israeli radio every day of Hanukkah, 2-3 times a day since 1962, when it was recorded by the Kol Israel, the choir of the Israeli radio, arranged by the composer Aryeh Lebanon. There is a second voice by the tenors that most Israelis that grew up in this period know. Here shows you the influence of the mass media, if you remember from my opening remarks, the influence of the mass media on the oral tradition. Azekmor, Azekmor. And this imitation of the voices is a staple of the Israelis who grew up in Israel in the 60s and the 70s. Finally, many Israeli educators, like the great cantor Leib Glantz, who was very active in America, opposed that German melody, and he even wrote an article on the sing that we sing in Maoz Tzur. Why do we sing with this Teutonic, almost Christian or Christmas-like tune? He proposed to sing Maoz Tzur with the tune of the blessings of Hanukkah over the candles. That was Glantz's solution. The final piece you are going to hear is a very interesting twist on the history of Maoz Tzur. In 1969, the great composer and lyricist Naomi Shemer, who wrote, as you know, Jerusalem of Gold, visited the Israeli army positions on the Suez Canal. And he was so impressed by the young people and by the fortifications of the canal that he wrote this song called Shivchei Maoz, in praise of the fortress. And she uses the first words of Maoz Tzur with a melody that she composed that sounds a little bit like that Venetian melody of Maoz Tzur that I played for you before. Let's listen to the Southern Command Ensemble recorded on the Suez Canal, the song by Naomi Shemer, Maoz Tzur Yeshuati.
Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, lechana el teshabeach, הרחק, הרחק ליד ביתי, הפרדסים נתנו ריח. אבוא במנהרות ובמצדות ובמערות, ובנקרות צורים ובמחילות עפר, אשם בלב הלילה דרוך בחרישי, צופה בי מבקש נפשי.
So I will end now with this final stanza for Maoz Tzur, composed, believe it or not, 2 weeks ago while I was preparing this presentation. And it says, prevent epidemic from our land, remove the corona from us. And I will sing it for you. Mena magefa minachaletecha, aser mi aleinu ha-korona. Maoz Tzur remains a tool not only for memory, but also for addressing the concerns of every generation. Thank you very much for your attention. Happy Hanukkah. I wish you good health to all of you. Please take care. And to end on something which is a little bit more uplifting than that previous stanza about Corona, Maoz Tzur in the rhythm of Brazilian bossa nova.
Maoz Tzur ישועתי לך נאל שבח תיקון בית תפילתי ושם דודה נזבח תכין מטבע מצפם נבח.
Well, I can't imagine that there's anyone out there who isn't smiling from ear to ear and dancing in their hearts and really feeling the uplifting holiday spirit, even in such a challenging time as we're going through now. I'm delighted that Nadia Gut, our very, very dear friend, member of the Board of Governors and from the Swiss Friends of the Hebrew University, was able to join us. Nadia, I'd appreciate it if you would close this wonderful, wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you so much, dear Edwin, for this wonderfully documented and presented, charming and touching presentation. Actually, a kind of tour d'horizon of Maoz Tzur, with spontaneous interludes, if I may say so by you. Now we have quite a selection of interpretations from very different geographical areas and also from different times at our disposition, which we can sing. And next year, I hope we can all sing Maoz Tzur together. Thank you so much and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadia. Good to see you.
Hanukkah Sameach, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, Francine.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag
Chag
Sameach.
Sameach.